Some nights you bolt the doors, turn off the lights, and you think you've made yourself safe from the world. You think the day is done, sealed in its plastic wrap, ready to be stored in the archives of your memory. You pull the blankets up to your chin and believe with a comfortable sort of arrogance that you know the exact shape of your life. Then you hear a sound at 2 in the morning that doesn't belong. A sound that rips through the cotton wool silence of your suburban fortress. And you realize you don't know a goddamn thing. And the person who is about to teach you that lesson is the one you thought you knew best in the entire world before. I tell you what shattered the stillness of my home and my heart on that moonless Tuesday. I need you to do something for me. Down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And while you're down there, go ahead and hammer that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because the journey we're about to take is raw. It's real, and you are not going to want to miss a single shocking turn. Now, let's go back. The clock on my nightstand glowed with the unforgiving numbers. 2:17 a.m., not midnight owl territory. Not the respectable hour of the sleepless warrior. This was the dead zone. The hour of car accidents and frantic phone calls from emergency rooms. The air in my bedroom was thick and still, tasting of old books and the lavender sachet I kept tucked in my pillowcase. Outside, the Colorado wind was having a quiet conversation with the pines that lined my property. A soft conspiratorial shushing that was usually the only sound I heard after dark. That's when it came. It wasn't a knock. It was a desperate, muffled thump against the front door downstairs. It was the sound of a body hitting wood, a heavy, defeated sound. It happened once, then twice. My heart, which had been peacefully slumbering, kicked itself into a gallop, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My first thought was an animal, a deer, maybe disoriented and lost. My second, more primal thought was of a man, drunk or dangerous, mistaking my house for another. I slid out of bed, my feet finding the cold floorboards, every nerve ending. Screaming. The house was a labyrinth of shadows. Familiar shapes turned into lurking monsters by the dim wash of moonlight through the windows. I crept to my bedroom window, peering down at the porch. And that's when my blood turned to ice. A figure was slumped against my front door. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, his form silhouetted by the pale security light on the garage. He was wearing what looked like an expensive suit, now rumpled and ruined, the jacket hanging off one shoulder as if he'd been in a fight. His head was bowed, his hair a mess. He looked broken. And then he shifted, lifting his head just enough for the light to catch the sharp line of his jaw and the curve of his nose. My breath hitched in my throat. It couldn't be it was Leo, my son. My son who lived 800 miles away in the glittering, soul-eating metropolis of San Francisco. My son who was the vice president of some incomprehensible tech firm, who made more money in a month than I saw in a year, who lived in a glass box in the sky and only came home for precisely 48 hours every Christmas. Panic, hot and acidic, flooded my senses. I flew down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the wood, my mind a chaotic slideshow of horrors. Had he been robbed? Attacked? Was he hurt? I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. The lock gave way with a heavy thunk and I threw the door open. He stumbled forward, nearly falling into my arms. The smell hit me first, not alcohol as I'd feared, but the stale, metallic scent of airplanes and old fear, mingled with the faint, expensive fragrance of a cologne I'd bought him for his 30th birthday. It smelled like cedar and regret. Leo? My voice was a choked whisper. He lifted his head. And the face I saw was a grotesque caricature of my son's. His eyes, usually a bright, intelligent blue, were sunken and hollow, swimming in dark, bruised-looking circles. A 2-day stubble shadowed his gaunt cheeks. But the worst part was the emptiness. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing. A void, the light was gone. The man standing in my doorway looked like my son, but the ghost staring out from behind. His eyes was a complete stranger. "Mom," he breathed. And the single word was so freighted with exhaustion and pain that it buckled his knees. I caught him, my arms wrapping around his torso, shocked by how thin he felt beneath the fine wool of his jacket. He was trembling, a fine, high-frequency tremor that vibrated through his whole body. "Oh my God, Leo, what is it? What happened?" I half-dragged, half-guided him inside, kicking the door shut behind us. I steered him toward the living room and lowered him onto the sofa, the one he and his father had spent an entire Saturday assembling years ago. He sank into the cushions like a stone. He didn't speak. He just stared at the opposite wall, at a framed photograph of the three of us on a beach in Oregon, a decade ago, a lifetime ago. His father, Michael, was laughing, his arms slung around a younger, happier Leo. I knelt in front of him, my hands on his knees, trying to force him to look at me. "Leo, talk to me. Are you in trouble? Did someone hurt you?" He slowly, deliberately, turned his head and met my gaze. The emptiness was still there, but now there was something else swirling in the depths. Shame. A profound, soul-deep shame. "I'm not in trouble," he said, his voice raspy as if he'd been screaming for hours. "Not the way you mean."
He ran a hand through his tangled hair, his fingers shaking. I think I ruined my life, Mom."
The confession hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. Ruined his life, my Leo? The golden boy, the one who had always succeeded, always excelled, always made us so impossibly proud. The idea was so alien, it felt like he was speaking a foreign language. I waited, my heart hammering for the other shoe to drop. Drugs? A woman? A crime. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I quit my job. I walked out. I left everything." The words were so simple, so mundane compared to the horrors I had imagined, that for a moment I felt a dizzying rush of relief. That was it? He quit his job? But then I looked at him again, the hollow eyes, the bone-deep weariness, the aura of utter devastation that clung to him like a shroud. This wasn't a career change. This was a demolition. "I packed a bag," he continued, his voice flat and detached, as if he were recounting someone else's story. "I took a cab to the airport. I bought a ticket for the first flight to Denver. I didn't even know if the door would still..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting back to the photograph on the wall. The ghost of a tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. I felt a wave of maternal fury rise in my chest, not at him, but at the invisible thing that had done this to him, that had hollowed out my son and left this shell in his place. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Okay, you're here now. That's all that matters. You're home." I stood up and walked into the kitchen, my movements stiff and automatic. I needed to do something, anything to feel normal. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove, the familiar click and hiss a small anchor in the swirling chaos. He hadn't just quit his job, he had fled. He had run from his life as if it were a burning building. And he had run here. When I came back with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, he hadn't moved. He was staring at his hands, which were resting on his knees. They were the hands of a stranger, the nails bitten down to the quick, the knuckles raw and red. These weren't the smooth, confident hands that typed on keyboards and signed important documents. These were the hands of a man who had been trying to claw his way out of a cage. He took the mug I offered, his fingers wrapping around it as if for warmth, though the room was not cold. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out. The peaceful, predictable rhythms of my life for 20 years. Now, it sounded like a bomb. It started about 6 months ago, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper.
He didn't look at me, but at the steam coiling from his mug.
This feeling like I was underwater, everything was muffled. The colors were faded. I'd be in a meeting, a big one, with millions of dollars on the table, and I'd look at the faces around me, and they all looked like masks. Like they were all playing a part in a show, and I was the only one who'd forgotten my lines. He took a sip of tea. I thought it was burnout. Everyone gets it in the valley. It's like a badge of honor. So I did what you're supposed to do. I took a vacation. I went to Hawaii. I sat on a perfect beach for 10 days, and I felt absolutely nothing. It was terrifying. I was in paradise, and the hollowness was just bigger, emptier, as if someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. I listened, my heart aching. I remembered our phone calls during that time. He'd sounded tired, yes, but he'd brushed it off. Just busy, Mom. The project's in its final stages. I had accepted it because I had wanted to. I had wanted to believe in the bright, shiny version of his life that he presented to the world, to me. I had been a willing audience for his performance. The company, he continued, his voice gaining a harder edge. We were developing a new AI platform, Synapse, we called it. It was supposed to revolutionize data processing for governments, intelligence agencies. That was the big contract. The one that was going to make everyone billionaires. He let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like breaking glass. It was brilliant, scary brilliant. It could predict human behavior with about 90% accuracy. Not just buying habits, voting patterns, social unrest, individual breaking points. We fed it everything: social media, financial records, medical histories, private messages, everything, all scraped and aggregated. The official line was that it was for national security, to stop threats before they happened. He paused and finally looked at me. The shame was back, darker this time. But that wasn't the whole truth. We were building a weapon, a tool of control. We built a backdoor into it. A feature that would allow a user to subtly manipulate the information people received, to shape their opinions, to nudge their behavior in a desired direction. To create a threat, not just predict one. It was a lie, packaged as security. My stomach churned. This was the world he lived in. A world of shadows and algorithms. A world so far removed from my quiet life of gardening and book clubs that it might as well have been another planet. I knew it was wrong,
he said, his voice cracking, from the beginning.
I remembered. Dad, he gestured vaguely at the photograph again. I remembered what he always said. The money doesn't matter, Leo. The title doesn't matter. What matters is, when you look in the mirror, do you recognize the man looking back? Michael. My Michael. A high school history teacher who believed in truth and integrity with a fierce, unwavering passion. He had died of a heart attack 5 years ago, far too young, leaving a hole in our lives that was still raw and ragged. For a long time, Leo whispered, I didn't recognize him. The man in the mirror was a stranger. A well-dressed, successful stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. He had your eyes, but his were empty. He was a ghost wearing my skin. This is the point in the story where I have to pause. Because I know some of you are listening to this and you're feeling that same chill of recognition. Have you ever looked at someone you love, your child, your partner, your parent, and seen a stranger looking back? Seen that light in their eyes flicker and die? If this is hitting home for you, if you know what that hollowness feels like, do me a favor and hit that like button. It doesn't fix anything, but it tells me and everyone else watching that We're not alone in this. Last week, Leo went on, his voice dropping even lower. We had a final review before the official launch. The primary client, a shadowy three-letter agency, was there. My boss, a man named Marcus Thorne, was giving the presentation. He was showing them the persuasion module. That's what he called the back door. And he used a test case, a simulation. They had created a profile of a real person, a young woman, a college student, an activist. They showed how, with just a few targeted articles, a couple of faked social media posts, and some manipulated private messages, they could turn her friends against her, get her kicked out of school, and flag her as a potential domestic threat. They destroyed her life, her reputation, just to show that they could. He put the mug down on the coffee table, his hand shaking so violently that the ceramic rattled. And everyone in the room, they applauded. They were thrilled.
They
saw power. They saw profit. And I looked at that young woman's face on the screen. And she looked a little like you, Mom, and I felt something break inside me. It was like a dam bursting. All the lies I had been telling myself, all the justifications, they all just washed away. And all that was left was this one simple, ugly truth. I was a monster. I was building the cage.
He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs.
All the strength, all the pretense, it all just crumbled away, and he was just a boy again. My boy, lost and terrified in the dark. I moved from the floor to the sofa and I wrapped my arms around him, pulling his head onto my shoulder. I held him as he wept, rocking him gently, murmuring the same soothing, nonsensical words I had used when he was a child who had scraped his knee or woken from a nightmare. There, in the pre-dawn gloom of my quiet living room, my son confessed his sins. He told me about the sleepless nights, the panic attacks he'd had in his glass-walled office, the feeling of being a fraud in his own life. He told me how, after that meeting, he had gone back to his desk, turned off his computer, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. He walked for hours through the streets of San Francisco, a ghost among ghosts, until he ended up at the airport, a man running from his own shadow. We sat like that for a long time, until the first pale gray light of dawn began to seep through the windows, chasing away the deepest shadows. His sobs subsided, replaced by a profound, exhausted stillness. The story was out. The poison was drawn. After Dad died, I said softly, my cheek resting against the top of his head, I found something. In his workshop. I think you should see it. His workshop in the garage had been his sanctuary. It was the one place I hadn't been able to bring myself to clear out. It was still exactly as he'd left it, the smell of sawdust and varnish. The neat rows of tools on the pegboard, the faint, ghostly outlines in the dust where projects had once sat. On his workbench, amidst jars of screws and cans of wood stain, was an old leather-bound journal. It was his project journal where he'd sketched out designs for bookshelves and cabinets. But it was also where he'd jotted down his thoughts, his frustrations, his philosophies. I led Leo out to the cold garage. The morning light was thin and watery. I picked up the journal and handed it to him. His fingers traced the worn leather cover. I never read the whole thing, I said. It felt too private. But I saw him writing in it the week before he passed. I think he was writing to you. Leo opened it. Michael's handwriting was a familiar, elegant scrawl. The last entry was dated a few days before his heart attack. And it wasn't about woodworking. Leo began to read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Leo, if you ever read this, it's probably because you've hit a wall. Not one of the small ones you can climb over, but one of the big ones. The kind that makes you think the road has ended. I've hit a few of those myself. The world will tell you that success is a straight line, an arrow pointing up. That's a lie they sell you to keep you buying things. Real life is a spiral. Sometimes, you have to circle back to where you started to find the path forward.
He paused, swallowing hard. I remember when I was offered the principal's job. More money, more prestige.
Everyone said I'd be a fool to turn it down, but I knew what it meant. It meant budgets and board meetings and politics. It meant less time in the classroom, less time with the kids, less time talking about the messy, glorious, complicated story of being human. It meant becoming a manager of things instead of a teacher of people. I turned it down. Your grandmother thought I was insane. But I knew, deep in my bones, that taking that job would have been a kind of death. A slow, quiet poisoning of the soul. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning understanding. He had never known that story, he continued reading. There will come a day when you are asked to trade a piece of your soul for a chunk of the world. They will make it sound like a good deal. It never is. The soul is the only currency that matters. Don't ever sell it cheap. It's better to be a broke man who recognizes himself in the mirror than a king who sees a stranger. If you ever lose your way, son, don't look for a map. Look for a compass. Your compass is that quiet voice inside you that knows the difference between what is easy and what is right. It's the voice I hear when I'm out here, with the smell of wood and the satisfaction of a clean cut. It doesn't shout. You have to be very still to hear it. Come home, not the building, but the part of yourself you left behind. The road back always starts there. He closed the journal, his hands resting on the cover, as if it were a sacred text. The silence in the garage was profound. It was the silence of revelation. The words of a dead man had reached across time and space to give his son the permission he so desperately needed, the permission to fail. The permission to stop, the permission to come home. He knew, Leo whispered, more to himself than to me. He knew I'd end up here. He knew you had a conscience. I corrected gently. He knew he'd raised a man who couldn't live with a poisoned soul. We stood there as the sun rose higher, spilling golden light into the dusty garage, illuminating the dancing motes of sawdust like tiny, glittering spirits. For the first time since he had arrived, I saw a flicker of the old Leo in his eyes. The emptiness was still there, but now it looked less like a void and more like a space waiting to be filled. We went back inside and I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon. The simple, comforting food of 1,000 childhood mornings. He ate like a man starved, not just for food, but for normalcy, for the anchoring rituals of home. As he ate, we started to talk. Not about the soul-crushing secrets of Silicon Valley, but about practicalities. I'd like to stay here, he said, his eyes on his plate. If you'd let me, just for a while, to get my feet under me. I don't know what's next. I just know I can't go back. He looked up, his expression vulnerable. I can pay rent. I have savings, a lot of savings. I don't want to be a burden. I looked at my son, this broken, beautiful man, and I thought of the years of echoing silence in this house. The holidays spent alone because he was too busy to fly home. The birthdays celebrated over a pixelated video call. The quiet ache of a mother whose child has grown up in a way into a world she cannot enter or understand. A burden? He was offering me the greatest gift I could imagine. This is your home, Leo, I said, my voice firm. You are never a burden here, but you're also not a guest. You're a 32-year-old man, so we're not going to do rent. We're going to be partners. We'll draw up a budget for the house expenses. You'll cover your share. You'll be in charge of the yard work, the gutters, and anything that requires a ladder. I'll handle the cooking, unless you feel inspired. We are going to be roommates. Adults agreed. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile I had seen. It was a little rusty, a little crooked, but it reached his eyes. 4. A split second, the ghost was gone. Agreed, he said, and just like that a new chapter began. The days that followed were a strange dance of rediscovery. We were two familiar strangers, learning to live with the new versions of ourselves. He slept for most of the first 48 hours, a deep, healing sleep that he probably hadn't experienced in years. When he was awake, he was quiet, moving through the house like a ghost, touching things, the worn arm of his father's favorite armchair, the chipped mugs in the cupboard, the books on the shelves, as if trying to remember who he was. He spent hours in his father's workshop, not building anything at first, just cleaning. He organized the screws, sharpened the saws, swept the floors. He was communing with his father's spirit, absorbing the quiet integrity of the place. Slowly, tentatively, he started to work with the wood. He started with small things, simple things, a birdhouse, a picture frame, a small wobbly stool. His hands, once soft and pale from a life spent on a keyboard, became calloused and capable. With every cut, every sanding, every joint he fitted together, a little more of the tension left his shoulders. A little more of the light came back into his eyes. I learned to give him his space, but also to draw him out. We fell into a new rhythm. We'd have coffee on the porch in the mornings, watching the sun burn the mist off the mountains. We'd have dinner together every night, talking about everything and nothing. I told him about my book club's latest scandalous novel, about my feud with the squirrels who kept digging up my tulip bulbs, about the small, quiet details of my life. He, in turn, started to talk about his. Not the trauma of his job, but the good things he had forgotten. He told me about a love for hiking he'd abandoned, about a passion for old jazz music, about a half-finished novel he had on an old laptop, one Saturday. About a month after he came home, I found him in the backyard, staring at the dilapidated old shed at the back of the property. It had been his father's first workshop, before he built the bigger one in the garage.
It was now a sagging, rotting
mess, covered in ivy. I'm going to tear it down, he said, without turning around. It's a big job.
I said, standing beside him. I know, he replied.
And then I'm going to build a new one, a smaller one. A place to write, and so we began. Tearing down the old shed was brutal, back-breaking work. We filled a dumpster with rotting wood and rusted nails. But it was also a cleansing. With every rotten plank we tore away, it felt like we were tearing down the rotten structures of his old life. We were clearing the ground for something new. As we worked, covered in dirt and sweat, I saw the boy I remembered. The one who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, the one who could lose himself in a project. The one who could laugh, a real, deep-bellied laugh, when I accidentally sprayed him with the hose. The ghost was gone. My son was back. The story doesn't end there with a perfectly finished writing studio and a best-selling novel. Life isn't that neat. The journey is ongoing. There are still days when I see the shadow of the ghost in his eyes, when the silence stretches too long, when the trauma of what he participated in rears its head. Healing isn't a destination, it's a process. But now we face it together. He started seeing a therapist in town.
He started writing again. He started living again. The other day I came home from the grocery store and I heard
music coming from the workshop. It was the low, mournful cry of a saxophone, the old jazz he loved. I stood outside the door and listened, and I thought about the nature of courage. We think courage is about climbing the mountain, about winning the race, about building the empire. But sometimes the most courageous act a person can perform is to stop, to turn around, to admit that the ladder you've been climbing is leaning against the wrong wall, to have the guts to kick it out from under you and start over on the ground. with nothing but your own two hands and a compass in your soul that points toward home. That's the beginning of rebuilding a life. Not just tearing down what was false, but having the courage to build something true in its place, even if it's small, even if it's wobbly, even if it's just for you. What do you think? What's the bravest decision you've ever had to make? Was it starting something new, or was it having the courage to stop something that was breaking you? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences, your wisdom, it matters. It creates a community right here of people who understand that sometimes falling apart is the first step to becoming whole. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me tonight. Your presence here means more than you know. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are so many more stories to tell, and I'm so grateful to have you here to listen. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, and remember to listen for that quiet voice. It knows the way.